Hello everybody, and welcome back to Odin's movie blog. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope we're doing well, and today we've got a little bit of box office news and also a little bit of news when it comes to movie theaters and why I suspect that we probably will not see any of the major theater chains like AMC or Regal, etc. open up for probably another month or so at the very least, and why we will likely see studios delay their movies once again because of the current trends of everything going on. And so just as a bit of a recap, AMC Theaters, the largest theater chain here in the United States, has said that they are going to reopen or start to reopen all of their theaters starting around July 30th. This was, of course, in response to the film by Warner Brothers, the film from Christopher Nolan called Tenet, which originally was supposed to have already been released at this point, again coming out or supposed to have been coming out mid-July, was pushed back to end of July, and now has been pushed back to mid-August. Do not be surprised that that date gets changed very soon. Obviously, the reason why I think it's not being done as quickly is because now with all of the different changes that have happened, so many release schedules have had to change, and when one domino falls, the rest of the dominoes also have to fall as well. And so if you change one movie on your schedule, you have to change every other single film in your release calendar. And when you're doing that and other studios are looking at what you're doing and want to make sure that they have the best weekend possible to make as much money back on their investments, it gets pretty chaotic and pretty hectic, which is why I imagine the studios right now are forming a game plan of what their next move is going to be, and that's going to take a little bit of working and a little bit of extra time, because I don't think many of them suspected that we would be in this position now getting towards the end of July, eventually moving into August. So just as a reminder, AMC, major theater chain, expected to open end of July. That has not changed as of yet. I suspect, though, that that will change, or at the very least that the numbers they originally planned, because I think it was around 450 out of the 650 total theaters that they have in the US, were planned to reopen on that date. So you could see those numbers just get decreased by a lot. Could be based on the area that you're in. Either way, things are not going to be going to plan, and some of the reasons why is because of what we have going on here. And this CNBC article, I think, kind of lays out the landscape of what the current theater chain crisis looks like, what the overall movie studio crisis looks like, because these two go well hand in hand, right? If the studio continues to push their release dates back, well, then guess what? The theaters are not going to be able to open. The mainstream theaters are not going to be able to reopen in any major capacity. At the same time, as long as movie theaters are not opening up in any major capacity, even to show older movies or classic films or more recent titles, making a little bit more back on those tickets, even with a smaller volume of people, that you would also at the same time, if you don't have that, then the studio is also at the same time cannot reopen either. But here are some numbers that I think are going to be and have been the most troubling for studios and movie theaters, and why you are seeing, I think, another shift that will happen very soon, possibly this upcoming week. And so as you can see, here are some key points. Less than 17% of the 5,440 theaters located here in the United States are open. So again, 17% of all movie theater locations in the United States as of right now are open. So a studio looks at that number and says, wait a minute, only 17% of all theaters in our country are open right now. And of those 17%, most of them have caps on how many people can actually be brought into their screens. And so they're looking at that as a financial problem, right? They're saying, wait a minute, if we release this brand new film Tenet, which costs hundreds of $millions to make, produce, and market, and we're going to expect to try and make money back on it, that is not going to be possible if only 17% of all movie theaters are open across the country. Again, that is including AMC, Regal, Cinemark, any local theater, right? Again, all movie theater locations add up to around 5,440 here in the US. Only 17% of them are actually open at this time. Major cinemas hope to be able to reopen by the end of July, but that depends on if studios keep their current movie release schedule. As I mentioned, we have AMC, which is set to open up end of July. Regal, set to open up or start opening up around the same time. Cinemark was one that started the process of reopening their theaters, but I believe they've actually at this time started to slow things down. So again, these things are very much interconnected, and because we are now seeing only still 17% of theaters open, it is now mid-July, getting towards the end of July. The first major release is supposed to be by mid-August. If we don't see a major change, if that percentage does not come, I would say at least close to 50%, before a week or two before the movie is set to come out, you will probably see a very quick, very fast shifting of movie schedules because of that very fact, right? Because the studios are going to look at that, look at those numbers and say, there's no way we can make money off of this if it's only available at half of the entire screen population across the United States. And even worse, out of those 50%, like of those movie theaters that are actually open, they are still limited in the capacities that they can actually hold. States that have kept their indoor cinemas closed represent 24.5% of all U.S. theaters. So again, the states that have kept the indoor cinemas closed, of course, the big one there being California most recently, who just re-shut down their indoor cinemas. Again, all of that makes up 24.5% of all U.S. theaters. Again, that's a large chunk of the overall theaters, meaning that at this point, if those states don't move and if those states hold, even if you were able to open up the other theaters in the other states, you're looking at the max of 75% or so of all movie theaters being allowed to reopen at 50% capacity, at 60% capacity, right? And that's what the next point says, which is that states that are allowing movie theaters to actually reopen have audiences capped from ranging 25% capacity to 66% capacity. Now, it was one of the higher ups at Cinemark who said that at least for his company, they could operate at 30 to 40% capacity and still be able to make profit off of that. However, as I've been making the point ever since that news came out, is that that's assuming they get 100% of that 30%, right? So let's say there's 100 seats, and if they, as long as they fill and get 30 seats, right, if they're limited to that number, let's say they're limited to only 30% capacity, they're limited to that 30 seats, and then they say, oh, as long as we get 30 seats, we'll be fine. They have to get 30 seats for every single screening and every single showing of that movie in order for them to be able to fulfill that, oh, we can still be profitable mentality. Not to mention, that is also under the assumption that they're going to be allowed to sell concessions at similar prices and that people going to said theater are actually going to be buying said product. So there's all of these things that are still very much up in the air. And when you actually have these numbers in front of you, it starts to make a little bit more sense as to why we are seeing this game of cat and mouse, really, between theaters and studios. Most especially with the studios, because they're the ones that really, at this point, hold all the cards. You know, a studio could tomorrow say, hey, come hell or high water, this is the release date. Any theater that's open is going to be able to work with us to book this movie for it to release at this time period, and whatever the state law is at the time, that's what the rules that they're going to have to follow in that instance, right? That is something that they could totally do, but you have to take it also from the studio's perspective as well, right? You know, if you have a studio that's invested hundreds of millions of dollars into a project like Tenet, like Mulan, they're not going to just want to put their movie out there. Like, let's say that these numbers don't change a whole lot between now and mid-August, right? Let's say it's 25%, 30% of all of the theaters across the country are open, and it's a week before Tenet, right? Let's say that of that, you still have that limit of 25% to 66% max, depending on the state that you're in. The studios are going to sit back, look at that and say, even if, assuming we do well in all of these theater locations that are actually available, even if, and assuming that we are able to get these types of capacities at this point, even though we've been closed now for several months, even though people have gotten used to watching things at home, what is our bottom line looking like? And it's the bottom line that is going to have the most impact on when these movies actually come out, and whether movie the movie theaters can actually even start the process of reopening. Because as you can see, it is quite a pickle for both involved. As you all know, I'm a huge proponent of movie theaters in general, and whether it's AMC, Regal, Cinemark, I am just someone that likes going to the physical theater. There's just something about the big screen with the giant sound, enjoying a movie experience together with an audience, an audience that's respectful, mind you. Again, I understand and have the same frustrations about how bad things have gotten at certain theaters, right? And also, this is assuming that the bulbs in the theaters are actually good and not flickering or dying, and that the sound is actually good and is not, speakers out here or there and it's messing things up, right? It's all under that same assumption. But for the most part, I can say that 95+% of all my movie-going experiences have mostly been positive, where the theater has actually looked pretty good. The screen has looked great. The audience has been respectful. And especially when we live in this age of social distancing, it's going to be, I think, a lot easier for us to have those more positive experiences because the seats are going to actually be clean for once. So that's going to be one thing that we didn't think of before, but now, of course, is even more so on our minds. And hopefully one less thing for us to have to worry about. Also, we're going to be distanced from those around us, meaning that we're not going to be cramped in right next to somebody. And so that's kind of nice to get that kind of space. Some theaters are implementing every other row being skipped, which means, let's say you want to put your feet up or you want to just stretch out or you're afraid of your kids kicking the seat in front of you. Well, then you don't have to worry about it anymore because there's not going to be anyone in front of you or behind you because of that mindset. So I think that there's a lot of things that could actually be very positive for moviegoers and incentives for moviegoers to actually go back to the theaters. But as these numbers indicate, that's not going to be able to happen until a couple things. One, movie theaters start to reopen, and two, that studios not only pick a release date, but also stick to that release date. And again, I understand why they are holding off and why they're having to move, because if they're looking at these numbers, right, if I'm the one that was the main producer behind a film and I'm saying only 17% of theaters are open, we're not going to make our money back, even if it sells 100% at every single one of those theaters for the first 2 weeks. It still would not be enough for us to be on that track of making our money back. And so I can understand to that extent as well, but someone has to make the first move, right? So whether it's the theaters opening up certain places to get this number up, because guess what? If the movie theaters open up and get this number closer to 50, 60, 70%, then the studios can look at that number and say, oh, we actually have a pretty good chance with that. And then that can allow them to reopen. On the flip side of that, if a movie theater chain has been closed down for a few months and is afraid that they're going to reopen their doors and their electricity bills are going to start to be due, they're going to have to start paying their employees again. They're going to have to start putting all this expenses that they've not had to be doing for the past several months back into it. And if they're not getting the numbers they need because of either limitations by the state at 25% capacity, or people are just scared not wanting to come because there's no new movie releases, then it's also a problem for them too. So what I'm really hoping happens is that the studios and theaters can come together, work some agreement out, because unless they work together, we're going to be stuck here for a very, very long time. And again, just going into this a little bit more, it says movie theater operators are feeling the pressure to reopen as rent costs pile up. The hope for AMC, Regal, Cinemark, and others is that they will be able to resume business by the end of July. So again, all three major chains. But again, that depends on whether studios keep their current movie schedule, which is, I would say, very much up in the air. Currently, less than 17% of all the theaters in the United States are open, according to data from ComScore. However, the number could change if more states roll back reopening plans amid growing numbers of cases. And so here you have the locations open versus closed. So obviously, this is another reason why that recent news, that breaking news I talked about last week, about California closing their locations is such a big deal, because if you look at California alone, we are looking there at around 500 plus movie theaters. And when they made that announcement that all indoor movie theaters would have to be closed, that's 490, with only 28 of them being opened. So California is a huge place for moviegoing, right? A huge part of the market. Why do you think movies first open limited in places like New York and LA? Because not only are the movies made there, not only are they great places for premieres, but also there's a lot of money there as well. New York, same thing, right? 271 theaters, 21 are actually open, 271 are closed. Texas, which many would argue is one of the more free states right now, is still having a lot of theaters closed, 328 versus 75. Now, these numbers can change and could change dramatically, though, because keep in mind that many of these are a part of the major chain conglomerates, right? So that means that the only reason why they're still closed, if they're, many cases like in Texas, even if they're allowed to reopen, is because it was a company corporate policy. And so that could easily change. If AMC says, boom, we're starting to open up our theaters tomorrow, well, then all of a sudden these numbers in Texas and in Florida and other places could definitely start to reopen. The problem, of course, is that we have these new reports coming out, some of which have been shown to be flubbed with the information, with the data about new COVID cases. Other ones, which again leave a lot of questions that still remain to be answered. And we're left in this place, right? We're left in this in between where we don't know where things are going to happen and what is going to happen overall. So I just wanted to break down why we've been in this stalemate now for several weeks, because yeah, it's a bad news for both sides involved. But we are seeing some movement in the market in some parts of the world. So China, of course, being the hellhole that it is, has actually started to reopen some of their theaters. And so they have now set dates for Dolittle, which was a huge box office bomb. Bloodshot, which did okay. 1917, which made some money at the box office as well. So those are set to be re-released in China, or possibly for the first time, because obviously China has a much more strict release schedule there, sometime in July, and also apparently has made deals to have other classic films get released in their country as well, which would be interesting to see, because obviously we know the classics are doing pretty well here stateside, how those movies would do over in China. And to kind of pick up with one of the last videos that I made about my review of the great film, great zombie horror drama, action, again, so many different things you could talk about with it. Train to Busan, the sequel to that, Peninsula, has now topped $13 million in Korea for its opening, which is, again, fantastic to see. It's now been out there for around 2 weeks, I think. So $13 million for any movie in this current environment, even if it's not the biggest that Korea's ever seen, even if it's not the biggest that the world has ever seen, for a movie like Peninsula, a sequel to a lesser-known South Korean horror film, zombie film, is still, I think, some pretty good and exciting news nonetheless, especially when you look to the fact that it's helped IMAX score its first $1 million global weekend since March. Yeah. Crazy stuff going on, but we've got box office numbers finally starting to come in. Obviously, there are people in Korea, across the world, who are still wanting to go see new movies in the theaters. I would imagine there's probably a good chunk of people here in the United States that want to go back to the theaters as well, especially to see movies like Tenet. Some, of course, might want to see Mulan. I know I have no interest in seeing that, but these are the numbers that we currently have. And until these start to change, which a lot of that's going to rely on governors and mayors, on cities and states to start the process of allowing the economy to get back going, unless and until this starts happening, you will probably end up seeing further movie delays. And that means many of these theaters, right, the 5,000, I would say by next year, you will probably see this number go down significantly, because I think a lot of theaters from this are going to eventually have to close once the ball finally drops. And especially if we can't get them reopened and the new movies in them, there's no way for them to stay afloat. But anyway, what are your thoughts about this? Do you think that we're going to see theaters actually reopen sooner rather than later? Do you think that July is still, that end of July period is still that time where AMC finally is going to put its money where its mouth is and start reopening? Or do you think that they're going to hold their tongues until they get a firm, resolved date, hey, we are not moving away from this date from studios when it comes to films like Tenet and Mulan, until they are able to dedicate themselves to reopening? And also, what are your thoughts about the fact that we're finally getting some box office numbers again? Have you seen Train to Busan since I gave my review on it? Video hasn't done too well, but that's okay, because it's a great film, and hopefully people find that video and show it some love. And I cannot wait for Peninsula to come stateside. It's supposed to come here early August, but as I said, only 17% of theaters open. Many of those not open near me. We'll have to wait and see. But let me know your thoughts about this and everything we talked about in the comments section below. If you like this video, smash that like button, hit that subscribe. It helps out a lot. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful day. And as always, God bless. And now a huge shout out to all of my Patreon members. Albertus Magnus, Animation Commentator, Brian P., David Bobrizik, Dion, DivX, Enrique Evangelista, Father Christopher Miller, hail to you, Father, Frank the Tank and the Shawhan Wiener Dog Clan, Harold Francis, the Honker Chonker Funky Monkey, Inflamed Wood, Intertrap Productions, Jason Clark, Jacob Juice, Jeffrey Toon, Jonathan Carney, Kenneth Camille, Lady T, Laura Story, who is the modern Major General, Mad Mitch Dunaway, Mike Jackson, Mr. Peabody and his evil twin with the beautiful hair, Orange at Reviews, Outpost Dyer, Out of Step with Reality, Riff Magos, Rosetta Ellen, Steve Glasker, Teresa Martin, Theodore Benton, Tina Bojan, The DJD Show, and Tina B. Thank you all for being my Patreon members, and a huge shout out to my Subscribe Star members, Stand For, John B., Perpetual Punster, Robert Revo, Mr. Roy, Glinzer, G2 Cool 99, Darkstar 57, Alex McCarthy, or J. Alex McCarthy Jr., US 888209 Fast, Dean Heiss, Harold Francis, J. Rod the Beer Guru, Nevadan G. Adams, and the K-Man, and Father Damien Cook. Thank you all so very much for being my Patreon and Subscribe Star members. Seriously, you are the wind beneath my wings. You help keep the lights on. You help support things like the giveaways for my $5 and up backers, and also allow me to do a lot of the extra stuff for the channel, including the exclusive OMB podcast that I do every couple of weeks with John, the Flick Pick of the Flick Pick channel. And yeah, thank you so much for your support. Don't want to really drag it out too long this month. You guys are amazing and beautiful people. If you want to have a name shout out, if you want to have access to giveaways, podcasts, any of that kind of stuff, check the links in the description for Patreon and Subscribe Star. You guys rock. Have a wonderful day. And as always, God bless.